Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. It's nice to see so many of you online tonight. This session this evening is entitled Spiritualists Together for the Planet and has been brought to us by the Spiritualist National Union as part of our contribution as spiritualists towards Scottish Interfaith Week. So as I say, thank you for taking the time to join us. You'll probably hear the clock chiming 7 behind me now. So there's the first interruption of the evening. But as I say, thank you for joining us and taking the time to be with us. Many of you I know are spiritualists, but I think some people might be non-spiritualists who are with us. So we extend a very warm welcome to you and thank you for joining us this evening. As spiritualists, as part of the Spiritualist National Union, we come together here in Scotland to be able to share our thoughts on the environment and make our personal pledges to the climate change emergency and what we each as individuals should and can be doing, as well as what collectively we can do as a religious organisation. The Spiritualist National Union exists and operates throughout the United Kingdom and overseas. But this evening we're focusing on what spiritualism does and represents here in Scotland. Very shortly you're going to be hearing from voices of spiritualists and churches operating in Scotland, each of whom are going to share their personal thoughts on the pledges and ideas that they should be contributing towards the climate emergency and how we as a group of people can respond to that emergency. Spiritualism does have a response to the climate emergency, and it's quite simple. We say within our philosophy that we all have a responsibility to the natural world in which we live. Spiritualism has no fixed creed or dogma, but we do share our thoughts with each other. We inspire each other to think about our own lives and how we affect each other, as well as, of course, the wider world in which we live. It's important that together, as religious and as spiritual beings, we think of our life here in this world as well as the next, and how our religion can inspire us to effect change in all that surrounds us. But before we begin the meeting this evening, can I ask you all to join together with me in prayer? Divine Spirit of infinite love and wisdom, we come to you in prayer, seeking your inspiration and encouragement. We as spiritualists and non-spiritualists alike unite in prayer as we seek to become more aware of our spiritual understanding and aspire to become known in your likeness. Divine Parent, we yearn for action and hope in the world's time of climate crisis and need, as we pray for your guidance. May you inspire us and our world leaders to become even more mindful of your presence in our lives, as we strive to seek the pleasure in sharing thoughts on how we can act responsibly in response to the climate emergency. May your divine grace inspire actions and not just words. We as ambassadors of your message, in being of service to others, pray that your ministering angels will guide us to be steadfast in understanding our personal responsibility to effect change and inspire others to make a difference. Lord of all that has life, may we be ever conscious of your power to open our eyes and be mindful of how our actions have consequences on the planet that we call home. Amen. Before we hear from spiritualists throughout Scotland, and we literally have voices online this evening from as far north as Aberdeen and as far south in Scotland anyway, as Ayr, and each of whom will share their own personal thoughts and make their personal pledge to the subject of climate change and indeed the climate emergency. was thinking of a reading that I could share with you this evening that hopefully could inspire us all into action and thought this evening. And as I said earlier, spiritualism, of course, has no fixed creed or dogma, but we are inspired by others who write their thoughts down, whether it be in poems or passages that they've written over the time, and indeed even in the great religious texts that we have had of the past, all of which in their own way can inspire us into action. I'm going to share with you this evening a reading which comes from a very small book called Manual for Peace. And it's written by a good friend of mine who's an American spiritualist, and her name is Jill Virginia Nia. Now, I first knew Jill in the early 1990s. And interestingly, about the time when she wrote this passage, and indeed this book, it was at the very first COP conference. And believe it or not, that's nearly 30 years ago now. And it's simply entitled, Our Environment. Mother Earth, it's a great place to live. This is our home, the place we all live, and you know what? There's not a spaceship big enough or an escape route very handy if we mess it up. The Earth is a wonderful place, and we're not taking very good care of her. If we have the knowledge, if not the common sense, to recognize that we should take care of ourselves in order to function at our best, then the Earth has got to be accorded the same respect and attention. Actually, more consideration should be shown the Earth, since if we choose to pollute our own bodies, then that's our problem, and we'll just have to face the consequences when our body decides to give us payback. The Earth, on the other hand, has no choice but to get even, and her long-term revenge will affect generations. We know it's not wise to pollute our bodies with junk. We can only fend off the effects of bad treatment for so long before we physically begin to break down from the abuse. The Earth is no different. Mother Earth has been putting up a good fight for some time now, but enough is enough. We all know what we should be doing and what we could be doing, and even what we would be doing if. Well, why don't we just stick that if in difference and make the time for it all to happen now? The Earth is still waiting. Now, I find it's very interesting that those words I've just shared with you, although written nearly 30 years ago, are as poignant today as they were back then. And that's sad in many respects, that perhaps, whilst we might have wanted to effect change 30 years ago, we still haven't done it to this day. So perhaps this COP26 conference taking place in Glasgow will be an opportunity for us all as individuals, as well as those representing the countries of the world. It will inspire them to come together to think of what actions they could be taking to effect some of the change that we need in this world today. You're going to hear from the voices of some of our churches here in Scotland, and indeed some of our members who represent different parts of the country and different congregations, each of whom have their own perspective on how we should be addressing the climate emergency, and how importantly we as spiritualists can actually demonstrate what actions we should and could be taking. So we're now going to move to that service, and we're going to hear some of the inspiration from the words of our pioneers to explore our responsibility for the environment and hopefully find the inspiration and the motivation to act. So let's start that slideshow.
Our emblem, which proclaims light, nature, truth, points us towards a deeper consideration of the natural world that we live in. Let us consider the power of healing actions on a grand scale, on a planetary scale. If we are conscious of this need to heal the home that we live on, Earth, then we create a healthier future for all.
Whether we consider ourselves to be environmentalists or not, we are spiritualists. It's our way of life to consider the deeper, often hidden currents of meaning that flow through our experience. Our spirituality progresses our thinking and activates our growth on many levels. While avoiding plastic, for example, may seem flatly mundane, we can inquire further into the spiritual dimensions of environmental responsibility to gain a richer understanding. In a discussion essentially about gardening, Silver Birch contributed the following words: "Always what has been sown will follow unswervingly the dictate of the natural law, and what is true in that realm of nature is equally true in the realm of human life and activity." He reveals the intertwined relationship between our nature and nature itself.
If we care to look into the world around us, we can see the mechanisms that will help to heal our environment. Nature has its own patterns, but humanity seems to have disrupted them through the domination of its own needs. The spiritual law of cause and effect that is enshrined in our sixth principle is now reflected in the physical environment. It is perhaps true that many of our predecessors' actions, such as the promotion of fossil fuels, intensive cattle farming, and the invention of plastics, were not intended to cause harmful effect to the ecosystem. It is certainly true that the conscious direction of the law of cause and effect is the very dynamic which will prevent further damage and, as much as is possible, reverse it. Spiritual power may yet demonstrate itself to be as relevant to this as is wind power.
Silver Birch was asked how he would describe the Great Spirit to children. He said, "I would point to the divine artistry of nature's handiwork. He is clear that a spiritual view of the world finds God's presence integrated within it. This is further echoed in the well-known quote at the start of the Lyceum Manual, all about parts of one stupendous whole, whose body nature is, and God the soul." This speaks to us of a profound interconnection between all of us and all of nature. It describes a spiritual ecosystem that is embedded within the physical one. As we have already heard, this idea is yet further developed in the manual under the heading Nature's Revelation, more familiar to many as the hymn God of the Granite. It speaks of a mighty tide of God's power that flows through everything before returning to its natural source in its awesome and continuous spiritual circuit. By considering this spiritual and the philosophical framework that we and our environment exist within, we might find greater insight, motivation, and courage to tackle what our planet our home, now deserves from us a healing touch, not a destructive one. It is time to look beyond for a better, healthier future. And if we struggle to see beyond the busyness of our everyday thoughts, then we just have to look at someone incredible, like Sir David Attenborough, with such great knowledge of the power of nature and learning from it that has touched the world. His plea is the same as ours and of the planets, which is act now.
While personal responsibility, our fifth principle, guides us towards actions that can prevent or reduce unhealthy stress on our environment, we should look once more and think of the big picture. Large companies and organisations have for far too long put profit before principle. The marketplace discriminates against those who cannot access or afford to make environmentally sound buying choices. As individuals, as consumers, and as organisations, we need to demand system change that enables us all to live more responsibility without unfair burden. With this in mind, it is recognised that spiritualists, we manage our own responsibility, and no one should feel pressurised into actions that don't feel right for them. Free will opens up many creative routes to healing the future.
Spiritualism's philosophy puts us back in control of both our own destiny through personal responsibility and our own collective destiny through spiritualism community of togetherness. Personal responsibility does not mean only thinking about our own behaviour affects our own progress, but how it affects that of our brothers and sisters. By extension, we can include this bounteous earth and life upon it. Never before have we had more real and global model of compensation and retribution that in the environmental crisis. The trash and the pollution of humanity has gathered over the past 100 years is staring back at us with menace and intent. Maurice Barbanel envisaged that humanity and enacted our second principle that honours human connection would mean war being driven from the face of the earth. In a similar way, enacting this principle along with personal responsibility and a desire to manage compensation and retribution could be a recipe to avoid disaster. Spiritualism is a rational and pragmatic religion for living. We have an opportunity to react and send a wave of healing into the world every time we make better choices. Healing requires justice to embrace all life.
The call for spirit in action grows louder by the day, and we can take strength and courage from the power and the support that our spiritual understanding gives us. It is also important to remember that personal responsibility can be applied to institutions and corporations as well as individuals. We can make our voices heard by telling our politicians and the companies that produce what we consume that they must behave and produce responsibility. Until we are offered environmentally friendly choices that are both accessible and affordable to all, then social injustice will continue to prevail. We can take heart from our pioneers who used their spiritual motivation to fight injustice and demand change. Their many legacies reminds us of this.
As individuals, we have before us an opportunity to express our spiritual values through our daily lives. Spiritualism and its philosophy are not something reserved just for Tuesday evenings. They are much greater, and they inform our way of life. It is with us in the supermarket aisles as we make choices about what we consume. It is with us when we recycle our plastic instead of discarding it to the landfill. It is with us when we plant our gardens with pollinating flowers instead of spraying toxic chemicals. By enacting our spiritualism, we are not just honouring our connection with those around us, but those who are yet to come. Our connection to the rest of humanity is not just through space, but also through time.
For us, it is our legacy that we are responsible for. Evidence tells us that the grass is greener on the other side. But how much will we enjoy the gentle climes of the summerland if we leave behind a depleted and defiled planet? If we truly accept that our temporary home is God's bounteous earth, and that the God forth is an intrinsic part of us, then we have enough understanding to become co-creators with the divine. We know that many spiritualists and churches are working and striving towards this, and including God in their actions is proving to be both transformative and restorative, the ultimate in all healing action. I'll leave you then with the words of the authors Fred and Mary Ann Broussard. We are not here just to care for and to sleep on God's couch. God is the couch.
Well, thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts there, and I'm sure that's food for thought for us all. We've heard some voices there representing different parts of Scotland, from our churches, which are literally the length and breadth of the country here, to individuals who represent different parts of the spiritualist community in Scotland. I'm also aware online we have some of my colleagues at Edinburgh Association of Spiritualists online too, as well as Kilmarnock Spiritualist Church, and hopefully we might hear from them in due course, as well as, of course, many friends from other parts of the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland as well too. Together, we have a responsibility, and together we must effect change, even as all the speakers have mentioned, if we can do that in some small way within our own lives. In a moment, I'm going to invite you to make a healing pledge for our planet as a way of expressing God's love in this world and bringing healing to the life and the entire environment around us. But first, before we do that, we're going to watch a short video here, which has been specially compiled for us this evening. And it's inspired by the wonderful words of a spiritualist pioneer who was an American poet in her own right. And these words are well over 150 years old now, but still poignant for us all in our everyday lives today. This poem that you're going to hear is a very well-known verse within the spiritualist movement, has been told many a time, and is printed in the Spiritualist Lyceum Manual, and is simply entitled Nature's Revelation. It has more recently been put to music, And of course, you're going to hear that music, and is well known within many of our churches in the UK as that favourite hymn, God of the Granite. So I'm going to leave you just to reflect on your own thoughts about the personal pledges we all can make to the environment today as we listen to the wonderful words and the music of God of the Granite. Thank you for your kind thoughts there. And now you've heard from us, you've heard some voices here in Scotland already about how the spiritualist philosophy can respond to the climate emergency that we're in at the moment. But what about your thoughts? What pledges would you like to make a difference? So at this point, I would like to ask you to do one of two things, or even both. One is type in the chat box what pledge you would like to make, or maybe some thoughts that have been going through your mind in the last few days, as of course our news is just covered with COP26. What's that allowed you to think about within your own lives? What response would you make to effect change, even in your own personal small way? So maybe you could type that into the box. And of course, equally, if you would like to share your pledge by sharing your thoughts, you're more than welcome to do that so as well, maybe by raising your virtual hand and speaking to everyone who's present. And of course, sharing your contribution from whichever part of the country you're in. So perhaps just type away there just for a few moments, and we'll let you all allow your thoughts to come in. And we'll go through them. And it could even be obviously personal pledges, that's what we're looking for, even small things that you could think could make a difference. But for those of you who are representing churches and centres throughout the country, what could we as religious communities be doing collectively as well too? So let's think about that as well. And if anybody would like to speak, please just raise your virtual hand. Now, certainly as spiritualists, we're well known for making our voices heard, and some of us are not that shy at coming forward, so please feel free to share your thoughts as well too. As I said earlier, the spiritualist philosophy through our 7 principles of spiritualism, teaches us to be responsible, to take action, to be aware of compensation and retribution, both within our own lives and how we can affect each other as human beings, as spiritual beings, but of course the effect we can have in the planet as well too. So just having a quick look at some of the comments that are coming in there. We've got the avoidance of palm oil from Alv is there. That's really important. We'll maybe bring Alv in a second to talk about that, because maybe many of us might not be aware as to what palm oil is or what kind of foodstuffs might we find palm oil in. So you can maybe give us some inspiration and some guidance on that there, Alv. Use less lighting in your home as well too. So think about saving power. And of course, there's very real practical reasons with rising fuel bills, while that might be a good thing too for us all to be thinking about. And of course, being more conscious of purchasing and using plastics. So how can we avoid plastics, even in our foodstuffs, as well as, of course, in the packaging that we're using? And thinking about even walking more, using public transport, thinking about the pollution that we create within our own petrol and diesel cars. Another good one that's there too. And of course, planting wildflowers, that's a really important one there too. We've got that from Caroline, and even maybe within our churches, if we've got gardens within our churches, what could we be doing to utilising even small spaces to make sure that they attract local wildlife, for instance, and biodiversity locally? So if we can maybe ask Alv at this point to come in. You're obviously made a comment about palm oil there. Tell us more, Alv.
Well, palm oil is used in so many things that we eat, and we only know this if we turn our packets to the back and read the ingredients, and we find it's quite high up. It's a fat that's used in cakes, biscuits, chocolates, confectionery, bread, all sorts of things. And because it's so massively used across the food industry, there's a huge demand for it. Unfortunately, it results in the cutting down of rainforests to plant palm trees, and as well as, you know, reducing the area of the earth which are the green lungs of the planet. It's also reducing the habitat for much wildlife and orangutans. And it's a big thing, but as a spiritualist, I know that my personal responsibility, when added to the personal responsibility of others who do the same thing, has a magnifying effect. So it's just little me avoiding palm oil in the food that I buy. But if we all did it, if more of us did it, then that power is a bigger wave of change that could happen. So that's why I made that choice.
Thank you, Alv. And again, that's inspiration for many people as well to be thinking about. I see a comment there from Libby Clark, a dear friend I haven't seen for a while. And I know I'm picking on you, Libby, but I think you put in a very useful comment for us all there. We all can do many things, and some things can be quite dramatic, like give up our cars and live in a different way. But the simple things we can do too, and that's about thinking about recycling some of the stuff that we all have. So can I maybe ask you to come forward, Libby, and unmute yourself there and share your thoughts that you put into the chat box there.
Hello, everyone. It was really from our grandson and granddaughters that we had that push a couple of years ago to start thinking about recycling things, because they were doing a project at school and they had to weigh for a week the rubbish at home. And Bob decided he'd do it here, and it was quite scary, because what they asked the children to do was weigh the shopping that was brought into the house and then weigh the rubbish that went out. And it's horrible. You know, if you unpack your groceries and you don't recycle, probably if you buy 4 carrier bags full of shopping, a bag and a half is recyclable. I'd love to be like some people are, where they unpack them in the supermarket and leave the stuff there for them, but I can't do that. I'm not brave enough. But we have recycled. When we've been recently clearing out my dad's house, offering the furniture and things that were the family didn't need and couldn't use, and they've gone to people who are in need, that makes such a difference to somebody else as well. Just that little thing of, you know, is this bookcase any good? Oh, a bookcase, great. You know, what about this sofa and chair? Are you giving them away? Yes. Well, I haven't got one. I sit on a patio chair. Take it. And it's been absolutely great. And today we've took 11 bin liners full of clothes, bedding, towels, curtains, cushions from my dad's house. He passed away in February, unfortunately. We've taken them from my dad's house down to the cancer research shop. And the lady was almost in tears. So for us, it was a little thing. It was things we didn't need, but for somebody else, it makes a difference.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a lot to think about there, Libby, and thank you very much for sharing that with us. And one thing we've certainly, you know, as part of a small group that's just recently started within the Spiritualist National Union, Spiritualists Together for Social Justice, we were talking at our very first event about the environment and our response to the environment and what we should be doing. And some members on that were sharing ideas about recycling things that you couldn't put out for the bin man in the recycling boxes. But there are other ways of recycling those things, like makeup, for instance. And sometimes within our local communities, there's places where you can actually recycle some of these things. So sometimes you just need to look locally to see how can you recycle things that perhaps you wouldn't think could be recycled there. In fact, I was in Tesco at the weekend and I saw a box and it was literally for old makeup. Not that I have much old makeup to recycle, but nevertheless, I thought that's a great idea. And even our local supermarkets are starting to provide that facility. That's a great idea. We heard earlier from Wendy Lyon from Aberdeen, and she shared her thoughts in the presentation that we had there earlier. But Wendy, if you can unmute yourself, you were talking about plastic. And of course, that's, I think we've all heard about in the news about our overuse of plastic and how we should be avoiding it. But that can be very difficult in practical terms to do that. And I see it was a comment you put in there, Wendy. So can shed some light on how you're trying to achieve that there in Aberdeen?
Well, I just have very strict items that I would buy, certain shops that I go to. So anything that I do buy, there are things you can buy with food that are in cardboard containers rather than plastic containers. So things like that. And we grow our own vegetables because my husband has an allotment. So I don't tend to buy vegetables from the shop. But if I bought fruit, then I would also buy that loose as well, rather than in plastic bags. But some things are very difficult to recycle. I just try to look for things which I can, which means avoiding other things. So I tend to go for cardboard packaging and I recycle everything that I can. So, you know, but I do feel that there should be so much more things. You should be given more of an option. And, you know, you're not really. So I think shops need to take more responsibility to give us the opportunity to do what we feel is right. But I recognise that with some items, perhaps it would be difficult to have.
Yeah. And of course, we all know that our big supermarkets, those big corporate organisations out there, of course, they make it so easy for us to buy this packaging, and do we really need it? So I think you kind of hinted at it, that perhaps one of the solutions there is shop local. And maybe in our local grocers, if we're lucky enough to still have that local to us, then they probably won't have the packaging. So you take your own bags and you fill them as you go along. So maybe we should be looking to shop in those locations as opposed to perhaps some of our big supermarkets. And certainly look at how far our food has traveled. That's something that I would make as a pledge as well too. Think about buying UK-based produce that hasn't flown halfway around the world effectively, and eat seasonal produce as well too. Nothing wrong with that, so let's enjoy the fruits and the vegetables of that particular season there too. I think we had Anne-Marie Dibben. I don't know if Anne-Marie's up for speaking, but I think she mentioned about tea bags. That's an interesting one. Many of us will be using tea bags, and she's saying obviously maybe it's a good thing to stop using tea bags and use loose leaf tea. So don't know if you want to comment on that, Anne. Give us some inspiration, Anne, how we can have our brew responsibly.
Well, I understood that there is plastic in the paper that's used for tea bags. So I decided to stop using it and use the specialist tea shops and make my own mixture. But even the tea leaves go in our food waste box that the council pick up every week and use to make the heating for the flats in the town centre and Callender House. And our council has been recycling things for a long time now. There's quite a few complaints about how many wheelie bins we've got, because one's for cardboard, one's for plastic and tin, one's for garden rubbish, and one's for whatever's left. So it's quite astounding. Even though I live on my own, the blue bin for the plastic gets filled and the cardboard one gets filled considerably. So it shows me just how much I try not to buy in packaging, but it still mounts up over the month.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you've hit it in the head there, and it's just about effectively, thinking, be more conscious as to what we're buying, where we're shopping, and the net result of that, what packaging do we end up recycling? It's great we're recycling it, but can we avoid doing that in the first place by shopping differently? And maybe that, and even if it's starting with a tea bag, then that's a good thing for us to be focusing on and thinking about. So that's a good tip there for us, Anne. Thank you. I see Stephen's got his hand up and he's waving as well to try and get my attention. Share your thoughts with us, Stephen.
I was going to ask Alvin in a little minute if there's any way to be able to share this chat with us, because what I actually wrote a second ago is making more of a conscious effort to teach myself to learn more and how we can save the planet. But how much do we love our children, our grandchildren? I know I've got no words whatsoever to describe how much I love my boy, our boy, I should say. My wife will kick me. But if we look at that, teaching ourselves, we're actually passing that down onto our children, so they'll learn to look after the planet, and maybe our grandchildren after that, and our great-grandchildren after that. And I think it can have just such a great knock-on effect. And if there is any possible way to get this, what everyone's been writing here, to do exactly that, learn more, I'd be grateful.
That's great. I think we'll definitely find a way of being able to do that, Stephen. I don't think that'll be an issue at all. So, and these are conversations we will return to. As I mentioned just before, we have Spiritualists Together for Social Justice, and the environment is one of the pillars, one of the themes that we focus on within those discussions. So we will come back to that and make sure, how can we build upon these ideas, these thoughts as pledges to make sure they become actions, not just for us as individuals, but for everybody who's willing to listen and read, which is really important. Would anybody else like to share their thoughts? Just put up your virtual hand. It is important we hear from you. Get your ideas as to what you would do. And whether you've spoken before or not, please feel free to share. And Janet's got her hand up. Hi, Janet, and you come there.
Hi, everyone. I'm very conscious about plastic, obviously, and there are so many things now that we can buy that are refillable. You know, because if we keep buying the same sprays, the same plastic bottles, and so on and so forth, when there are, you know, there are shops around where we can buy grains or all kinds of things, you know, directly into our own bags. And I think that anything that is, you know, refillable, even Molten Brown and their products, for heaven's sakes, we are high end here talking of, you know, soaps, and Molten Brown are doing refillable pouches. So, I mean, when you get companies like that, I was going to say jumping on the bandwagon, but that's the wrong wording. The correct wording is have become very aware. And I think that's what it's all about. Common sense as well, and awareness. And I think everyone, the comments that people have written, you know, those things have occurred to us all. But when you read them again, it almost prompts your mind to think, you know, I did think about that, but I've never got round to doing it.
Yeah, of course.
And we do need to be prompted, and we do need to do that. And yeah, there are free markets nowadays on, you know, on the internet, where if you don't want stuff like Libby, we moved home recently, and yes, there is stuff that we have given away, you know. I had an open day in Scotland where friends came along and just took what they, you know, they wanted, but also for people that they knew that needed. And again, it's what it's all about.
I think that's great. Thanks for that, Janet. You know, as a spiritualist minister as well too, and I'm thinking to help us all just focus, of course, we all know we need to recycle more, we need to think about the environment. Whether we do it or not is another question, as you mentioned. But, you know, we have a responsibility as spiritualists as well too. And how would you respond to that? You know, if I was to ask you as a spiritualist, Janet, you know, should spiritualists be more mindful of the environment? Or even less mindful, or does it really matter? Do you think our religion of spiritualism should move us in any particular way to effect change? Do we have more of a responsibility, perhaps?
I mean, given our principles, it says it all, to be honest, because we share a home, if you like, with the brotherhood of man. And, you know, and just being responsible, you know, to fend for them as well as for ourselves.
Yeah,
because we're all interconnected. Every single one of us is interconnected, as we are to the power. And, you know, and it's like, give it away. You know, I'm not talking about, you know, lose your power. I'm talking about use your energy. And we do have a responsibility as spiritualists. We really do. And it starts with us, and it starts with kindness. It really does.
Yeah.
But it's not just kindness to people we know. It's kindness to everyone out there, but also to nature. And people have, you know, written about plants and you know, planting things that attract insects and so on and so forth. But be kind to the earth as well. And, you know, just pick up litter.
Yeah.
You know, we ought
And
to
I think
have a litter day as spiritualists. We really do. And I don't mean spread the litter.
Well, I think I think Libby came up with an idea, although I have to note it's her husband that's doing it, not so much Libby, but it's going at, he's the, what is it, the water womble or something she was saying, describing them, they are clearing up the riverbanks of rubbish that's been dumped. So maybe we all should be the spiritualist wombles. There you go, out there taking action in our local communities. So. But I think another important thing that we should never lose sight of is spiritualists, we talk about God being both within us and all things that have life. And if that's the case, we know we live in a living world. The planet is a living being, really, and interconnected with us. God is part of that sparrow and the bee and that blade of grass. It's really important for us to focus on that and see God as in all things and how we have a responsibility to make sure that life force is protected, not just human and animal life force, but that within nature as well too. I see Wendy's got her hand up, and then Lorna. Wendy, let you come in.
Yes, it was just to say that I work in a primary school and we've had a culture for some time to recycle everything. And the children from nursery through to primary 7 are encouraged to take snacks that, not things in plastic, but perhaps pieces of fruit. Some children can't afford that, so we have supplies in the school. But we speak almost on a daily basis of some type of recycle event. Children are chosen each day to pick up litter. Sometimes we go out into our local community, and it's the excitement the children have at picking up the litter, because they feel they're important, they feel that they're doing things which matter. And we recycle all paper, so old circulars, old notes, the children will use those to draw on. So everything within the school, as much as possible, is recycled. And we have areas where there's food put out for birds as well. So we're trying to encourage the birds to come in nature and for the children to have an active awareness and part of that. And we tell them that although it's their school, it's also their community and they are part of the community. So, it's about respecting. Doesn't always work, but we certainly try. It's about bringing the awareness and encouraging things which can help everyone. And I think within a young mind, that's where we can sow the seed. And often they are the ones who go home and tell their parents.
Exactly. I think we're finding that, we're hearing that more and more, especially in the news. It's young people who are leading the way, who are not only inspiring us, but they're actually forcing us to take action and think about what we're doing and the responsibilities we have. And that in many ways is quite humbling in itself, isn't it? So Thanks, Wendy, for sharing that. We've got Lorna with her hand up there.
Yes, within the area where I live, we've got a Facebook page which MD that's disposing of anything, someone could pick it up or drop off to someone else. If they're if they couldn't dispose of something, someone else will pick it up for them and make use of it rather than to put it into landfill. And also within my own family, we've actually got a group chat. Any of us getting rid of anything, see if anybody in the family's wanting it first before it goes in elsewhere, and then to a charity if they need it. So trying to recycle as much as we can.
No, that's brilliant. Thanks for that. And Anne again, Anne Dibben.
Yes, I was just wondering about, like a couple of other people, I've recently moved house, and in the last place we had a much bigger garden, and I used to put a lot of the waste from the garden in a place, and I was just amazed at the magic of what time did with all those items that I put in, the grass clippings and the clippings from the plants, and I thought that showed a real recycling of nature. But I also wonder if want and need is coming into it here, because I know we've got a huge obesity epidemic, but are we buying just too much, particularly with food? And do we throw too much food away? I'm just reminded of a domestic science teacher who taught us how to make new dishes out of food that was left over from the previous day, that were just as nutritious, exciting, maybe the flavors were better. And, you know, that's another thing that we could perhaps teach our children.
Of course, definitely. And as we've already said, even the children are teaching us as well. So it's about sharing that information, isn't it? You know, and I think Caroline Spink was adding to that as well, about her grandchildren coming back and giving her some good ideas as well about how to save energy, you know, and all of these things contribute towards the aim that we're hoping to achieve. We've got John and then Ewan. So John, next, please.
Hi, John. Yes, echoing in Anne-Marie's sentiments there about food, most certainly, you know, there seems to be an abundance of food. Our local supermarket down the road, there's nothing that you can't buy, whether it's in season or not. It comes from all parts of the world as such. But for me, astounded by the different various departments in that, you know, grocery store, where by 7 o'clock in the evening, there's just shelves upon shelves of food, you know, with what we would say, you know, reduced to clear. And I think it's something that Stephen spoke about earlier. We do have a duty, you know, and a sense of responsibility to educate ourselves. I feel that Spiritualists very much one passionate about progressing in this lifetime, that we do educate ourselves and certainly the next generation, certainly around things like use by dates, best before dates, best buy dates, that if you buy something this evening at 7 o'clock for consumption that evening or even tomorrow, that it's not going to kill us. Oh, I'm not going to touch that. Oh, that's out of date. That's going to kill you and poison you. My dad had an old adage, you know, half the price, I'll enjoy it twice as much. And he would, you know, live to his late 80s until he passed. Yes, and I followed on that tradition. I would buy my favorite sausages and bread and potatoes or whatever, many an evening, and to have it that evening or the next day, much to the delight of our sons, who remind us that's very bad for you. But hey, I'm living proof that that's not the case. You can enjoy things which would ordinarily, yes, be thrown out. I am aware from speaking to the manager that a lot of it is donated to charity and food banks. I know Christmas last year, they were trying to sell off their free-range turkeys, and no one would buy them at over here at €5, even €1. And they were left with over 100, which they donated to local charities, which did my heart good, knowing that at least they went somewhere where they were going to be given, you know, cooked, given to the homeless, and not just, you know, dumped, and a cost involved in dumping and disposing of them. So yes, we need to educate very much, especially I feel the next generation about, you know, dates, and not of the fruit variety, but certainly those that, you know, if it looks okay, smells okay, tastes okay, then fine, you know, why, you know, pay top price and insist it has a week's date on it, and then the day it goes out of date, goes straight in the bin. So
that's
yeah,
great.
thanks
for that, John. Yeah, a lot of inspiration there too, and what we could be thinking about. Ewan, you've got your hand up there.
Well, good evening. I often think that history can influence the future in many of the simplest of things, and how generations come together, but how echoing what some folk have said about making younger generations aware. And I was thinking of one of the things, I mean, like many folk, I suppose, up here, I like the odd fish supper or haggis pudding supper, sometimes on a Friday night, now and then, just now and then. But I remember the days, and they weren't too distant, when the fish supper or haggis pudding supper would come wrapped in a newspaper. Now, these were the days that it was great. It did not do us any harm. We survived all these. And yet now when you go in, they're given in a polystyrene dish, which is thrown away. And then it's for some reason wrapped in paper again. Why? And it's different things like that. So very much looking at that, and also that, you know, there's a throwaway culture, and it's about not throwing away. It's about fixing things. We're speaking earlier about very much using things again and upcycling things here as well, but also, you know, teaching kids about the outdoors here as well, and avoiding the mobile phones. I often say my two nieces are kind of surgically attached to their mobile phones, and it's really taking them outdoors and the wonders of the garden and everything. And you know what's great, I remember when I was young of my father taking a wee cutting of a plant and watching that grow. And it's the simplest of things, and we can bring that in and that little bit of joy at the same time. Hopefully that's a starting to do that job. So I very much feel it's about bringing the generations together.
Thank you, Ewan. He's always thinking about his slim figure, you see, just having all those fish suppers and black puddings. That's what it is. So there we go. Thanks, Ewan. Well, we're almost about out of time, but feel free if anybody else would like to speak or share their pledge or inspiration for us all to go away and think about what we can do to help the environment in which we live. Feel free to do so. I think the main thing, obviously the main message of this evening, is for us to really prick our conscience as spiritualists and as non-spiritualists alike, as spiritual beings who class ourselves as being religious and living by a religious philosophy. What does that mean for the world in which we live? One thing we always say as spiritualists is life is eternal. Of course, we know that, but actually life in this world is finite. And if we think of eternity, life here, whether it's a 70, a little bit longer, or a little bit shorter, is but a tiny, tiny part of eternity. And that's the time that we have to live and experience this beautiful world that we live in. So how can our religious philosophy help us appreciate that more? A bit like Ewan was saying, getting out into the outdoors, appreciating nature, but actually really understanding the biodiversity that we live within and how we can enhance that. And we have a responsibility to take care of it as well too. So as spiritualists, maybe through our principle of personal responsibility or compensation and retribution, we need to sit back and think, okay, what are we doing to compensate for not only our own actions, but our actions of others as well too? We have a responsibility to take action and not just speak the words, in the same way as our politicians, our world leaders have that responsibility too. So with that, everyone, can I just say thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, whether it was in the chat box. And I think we've got Helena. Sorry, she's just putting up her hand there as the last speaker. On you go, Helena. We'll let you in there.
Good evening, everyone. Sorry, as you were speaking, the words that I did get into my head is we take from the earth, we give to the, what we take from the earth, we give back to the earth. And I guess that is like the principles of seasons. We all go through 3 stages, then you have your resting period and it comes back. And that's, I believe, if we can, what we do take from it, that we provide or give back in some format, whether, as I say, protecting species, even insects, instead of killing them, taking them outside, because everything has a balance and it is equilibrium, and it's being mindful that what you take away has an extra effect on the other side, but it's finding that kind of mutual equilibrium. The way I see it is what we take, we give back in some format. And I guess that's the same with spirit. They leave, they come back.
Exactly. So, yeah, and let's be mindful of that and responsible for that. Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Helena. That's great. Well, as I say, thank you for your contribution, whether in the chat box or if you've been brave enough to speak. And can say a huge thank you to our contributors throughout Scotland who shared their thoughts in the slideshow earlier. Some were very, very nervous about doing it, as they always are. But I think there was a lot of food for thought for us there as well too. And thank you for making your contribution. Those people were deliberately chosen because of their locality throughout the country. And we were not short of the volunteers, even though they were gang pressed into doing it. But as always, they rose to the challenge. And as I say, a huge thank you to everyone. This is the Spiritualist National Union's contribution to Scottish Interfaith Week. It's the first time we ran such an event, and with the powers of the internet, we're able to do it without moving from the comfort of our own homes. But whether we've got non-spiritualists with us this evening or not, I'm sure we'll make sure that our voice as a spiritualist community is known within the wider interfaith community. And what we will do with all your pledges that you put in the chat box and what we've discussed tonight is we'll collate them in a way that we can share them with other religious communities, and importantly say, this is what spiritualists pledge for the world in which we live today. Now, I know that many of you are here in Scotland and coming from different parts of the country and representing different churches from our main cities, from Edinburgh, Glasgow, Dundee, Ayr as well too, and of course individual members throughout the country, from the Highlands, the north of Scotland to the south of Scotland too, and many English friends and Welsh friends too, and Irish friends. So we're truly international this evening. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. We also have some people from SNUI who have joined us, who are part of the discussion group. We have a philosophy group that runs once a month in SNUI. Thanks for joining us. And of course, others who have been part of the Spiritualists Together group gathering that we have online once a month. Now, I think Al's going to put up a slide here about social media connections so that we have that as well too. Remember, depending on how you found out about this evening, we are online. Of course, there is the SNU's website, snu.org.uk, and you can find out where our churches and centres are throughout the United Kingdom and indeed overseas as well too. You can keep in touch. And of course, those are the handles there that you have for Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter as well too. We also have the YouTube channel. So again, you can have a look there, and at some point, an edited version of this evening will be posted on that channel as well too, for others to listen to after this evening's event. Obviously, we have the news section of the SNU's website, and that's where you'll find future events on this subject and many others that we're going to be discussing online. So once again, thank you for joining us. In the chat box, we are going to put up there, for those of you who haven't already seen it, it's an extract from the latest edition of SNU Today, which is our members magazine, and it's on the subject of the environment and how we can be responding to the climate emergency, and it's entitled Plans for the Planet. So please take time to click on that before you go offline if you haven't already seen that. And that's a useful guide for us to be thinking about what we as individuals can be doing for the planet. So as we conclude this evening's service of words, of thoughts, and of reflection, I'm going to ask forward Minister Janet Parker to give the closing prayer. Janet.
Father God, creator of all things, through our understanding of your very presence within each of us, please add your blessing to our collective ideas and to our own personal promises to help this which is our home, your world, and ultimately may affect even our existence here. May your divine light shine forth to help us appreciate what we have, but to help us as we look to restore balance to ourselves, but especially to this, our beautiful world. Amen.
Thank you, Janet, for those lovely thoughts there. As I say, finally, thank you for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed your evening with us and you have all in your own way made your pledge. Let's turn those words into actions now, and that's our responsibility and hopefully our response collectively as a gathering here online this evening. Until we meet again online, have a lovely evening, whatever you're up to, and take care and see you again soon. Thanks for joining us. Bye.